General Hospital spoilers reveal that Michael finds himself backed into an emotional corner where the mounting pressure to protect Wiley and Amelia has grown so intense that he can no longer delay decisive action. The chaos that began as quiet disagreements over parenting philosophies has now transformed into a perilous storm, where Willow's wavering state of mind, Drew's obsessive control, and the growing instability of their environment threaten to swallow everything Michael holds sacred. The man who once clung to hope that co-parenting and compromise might be enough is now staring into the face of a darker truth. Love and understanding are not sufficient shields when danger lives inside your home. What Drew has become is not just a hurt man or a rejected partner, but a ticking time bomb of emotional volatility and strategic cruelty, one who knows Willow's vulnerabilities and exploits them with surgical precision. Every attempt Michael has made to reason with Willow, to remind her of her worth and of her children's needs, has been drowned out by Drew's relentless whispering behind the scenes. It's as if Drew planted himself inside Willow's conscience, twisting her guilt, her longing for redemption, and her fragility into weapons of surrender. Michael has watched the woman he once loved unravel thread by thread, and now what remains is a version of Willow so haunted, so detached, that even her maternal instincts have been blurred by confusion and grief. For Michael, this isn't just a crisis of custody, it's a rescue mission for his children's emotional safety and for the last remnants of Willow's autonomy. Faced with the irreversible damage Drew is causing, Michael takes the most painful and irreversible step. He forces Willow to choose. Not just between men. Not just between relationships. But between what remains of her own agency and the poisonous grip Drew has over her. The ultimatum is stark: Wiley and Amelia, or Drew. It is not spoken in anger, but in despair. It's the product of months of watching his children become collateral damage in a war of manipulation and misplaced loyalties. Michael doesn't want to issue ultimatums. He doesn't want to be the man who forces a mother to walk away from the man she claims to love. But he also can no longer tolerate the slow-motion train wreck of Willow's self-destruction with Drew in the conductor's seat. The stakes are no longer theoretical. Wiley has begun asking questions no child his age should be forming, questions about who is safe, who is angry, who is crying behind closed doors. Amelia has started showing signs of anxiety, clinging to Michael at drop-offs and waking from nightmares with Willow's name on her lips. Michael sees the signs. He sees the emotional bruise spreading through his household. And he knows that if he doesn't act now, he will be complicit in their decline. Issuing the ultimatum guts him. He knows what it means. He knows it could push Willow over the edge or further into Drew's arms. He also knows that for once, he has to stop prioritizing her feelings over the children's futures. In truth, part of Michael still aches for the version of Willow he once knew, the woman who fought for Wiley in the courtroom, who held Amelia like a lifeline, who stood beside him during the darkest hours of Nina's betrayals and Carly's scandals. But that Willow has vanished beneath a fog of guilt, trauma, and Drew's insidious influence. And what's left is someone who believes that protecting Drew from consequences is more important than protecting their children from trauma. This transformation terrifies Michael. It tells him that the line between caregiver and enabler has been crossed. That unless someone shocks Willow into awareness, she may never return from the place Drew has led her. Michael's demand is simple in words but seismic in meaning. If Willow wants to be in the children's lives, she must sever all ties with Drew. No more visits. No more joint decision-making. No more quiet manipulations passed off as concern. It must end. Not later. Not when Drew finally sees reason. Now. Because the damage is already happening, and if Michael waits any longer, it might be too late. And he's not just drawing this line for himself, he's doing it for Wiley and Amelia, who deserve stability, and for Jason and Carly, who have been quietly standing behind him, helping him hold the family together while Drew tears it apart. There's no joy in this moment. No vindication. Just grief. The kind of grief that comes from watching a person you once loved become unrecognizable. And realizing that the only way to protect the ones you still have is to build a wall between them and the one who once stood beside you. But even as Michael holds the line, He braces himself for Drew's retaliation. He knows the man won't go quietly. Already, whispers have reached him that Drew may be planning something drastic. That he's spoken to people outside the legal system, that he's gathering documents, making threats, hinting at leverage. Michael knows this isn't just about winning anymore, it's about survival. If Drew escalates, it won't be a custody hearing, it will be a war. And if that war comes, Michael is prepared. He has Jason, Carly, Diane, and even Curtis now quietly watching Drew's movements. But what he doesn't have, and what he still desperately hopes for, is Willow's clarity. Her willingness to choose her children over the chaos. To see what's happening and walk away from the fire before it consumes her too. He doesn't know if she'll make the right decision. He doesn't know if Drew's hold over her is too strong. But he knows that he can't let the past blind him anymore. He won't let guilt dictate his choices. And he certainly won't sacrifice Wiley and Amelia's safety for the sake of pretending things aren't as broken as they are. Because the truth is, they are broken. And unless someone steps up and makes a devastating call, they will stay broken. Michael is ready to be that person, even if it means becoming the villain in Willow's eyes. Because at the end of the day, he would rather lose her than lose the children. And if that means facing Drew's fury, surviving Willow's heartbreak, and enduring the whispers of betrayal from those who don't understand, then so be it. He'll carry that weight. Because he knows what it means to be a parent. And sometimes, being a parent means standing alone, doing what no one else dares to do, and hoping that one day, those you're trying to protect will understand why you had to do it. Drew is quietly orchestrating a new strategy that could shake the very foundation of loyalty in Port Charles. After suffering repeated humiliation, rejection, and isolation, he has reached a psychological threshold from which there may be no return. The pressure to reclaim control over his life and his relationship with Willow has mutated into something darker, an obsession laced with resentment, tactical calculation, and a dangerous willingness to confront the one man who once meant everything to him, Jason Morgan. Drew's plan is not just about undermining Michael anymore. It's about deconstructing the fortress of loyalty that has kept him and Willow on the outside. With every moment Willow drifts further into confusion and despair, Drew sharpens his focus. Feeding his bitterness with a singular goal: topple Michael's credibility, rupture Jason's allegiance, and reclaim the family he believes was stolen from him. And he is prepared to do it through psychological warfare, manipulation, and calculated pressure points, no matter the emotional wreckage he leaves behind. Drew has studied Jason's patterns. His unwavering loyalty to Michael, his blind spots when it comes to Carly, and his conflicted feelings about Willow. What was once brotherhood is now a battlefield. And Drew has weaponized that history into a tactical advantage. If Jason won't willingly shift his loyalty, Drew intends to manipulate him into doubt, by feeding him partial truths, fabricating grievances, and pushing Willow into the center of the conflict until Jason begins to question whether Michael is truly acting in the children's best interest. But what Drew doesn't anticipate is the emotional toll his strategy will inflict on Willow, who is no longer just a woman caught between two men, but a deeply fractured soul unraveling under the weight of her own guilt and grief. Haunted by the loss of Wiley and Amelia, tormented by the shame of her courtroom collapse, and overwhelmed by Drew's increasing dominance over her choices, Willow finds herself spiraling into a psychological labyrinth with no clear exit. Every time she attempts to reclaim her voice, Drew drowns her in reassurances that he's the only one who understands her, that Michael's ultimatum was cruelty disguised as love, and that Jason is part of the machine trying to erase her. She wants to believe him because it's easier than facing the truth, that she has lost control, that she is being emotionally manipulated, and that her maternal instincts are being weaponized against her. But deep inside, a part of Willow senses the danger. She can feel her autonomy slipping through her fingers, replaced by Drew's decisions, Drew's plans, Drew's voice in her ear whispering what she should do next. The more Drew escalates, the more Willow becomes the center of a storm she can neither escape nor fully comprehend. Her nights are haunted by images of Amelia calling out for her, by Wiley's quiet disappointment, by Michael's pained eyes, and Jason's cold distance. And yet, in her waking hours, Drew convinces her that all of it can be undone, if only she stays with him, fights beside him, and allows him to steer the course. He spins a narrative where they're the victims of betrayal, where Michael is the villain, and Jason the enforcer of a corrupt system that wants to erase everything they built. It's intoxicating in its simplicity, seductive in its promise. But it's not real. And somewhere deep down, Willow knows that. But knowledge is not the same as strength. And Drew's obsession is not just about control, it's about dismantling every alternative to his version of the future. He pressures Willow to cut ties with Jason, to stop responding to Michael's messages, to rely solely on him for emotional and legal decisions. Each step is a layer of insulation that isolates her from the people who once anchored her. He frames it as protection, but it's possession. He presents himself as the cure, but he is the disease slowly bleeding her of her will. Meanwhile, Jason begins to see through the cracks. He senses that Drew's behavior is no longer driven by grief, but by obsession. He observes the changes in Willow, how her words no longer sound like her own, how she trembles when Drew is near but covers it with forced smiles. Jason confronts Drew, only to be met with veiled threats and philosophical arguments about justice, fairness, and betrayal. Drew insists that Michael deserves to fall, that Jason owes him loyalty, and that Willow belongs with someone who won't weaponize her pain. But Jason sees it for what it is, a delusion wrapped in narcissism, built on the ashes of the man Drew used to be. Still, Jason knows confronting Drew head-on could push him into even more dangerous territory. And he worries for Willow, worries that if Drew senses she is slipping away, he might lash out, not in violence, but in acts of irreversible sabotage. Jason becomes her quiet protector, watching from the shadows, gathering evidence, preparing for the moment when he may have to step in and save her not just from Drew, but from herself. Because Willow is now at the tipping point. Her identity has been chipped away by grief, then reshaped by Drew's twisted devotion. Her children's voices, once her compass, now feel like distant echoes beneath Drew's promises of retribution and rebirth. As the days progress, Port Charles braces for what many fear is coming, a showdown between blood brothers turned enemies, with Willow as the shattered prize in a war of ideology and obsession. Drew is no longer hiding his ambitions, he is embracing them with a cold, unflinching clarity. Jason is preparing for the moment when words will no longer suffice, and only action can protect the innocent. And Willow, suspended between fear and guilt, becomes both the battlefield and the casualty of a battle that may destroy them all. Willow is on the verge of betraying Drew, and this betrayal marks a critical turning point in a downward spiral already defined by obsession, emotional manipulation, and suffocating control. What began as a relationship built on grief and mutual understanding has now devolved into a psychological war zone in which Willow finds herself trapped between loyalty and survival. Her decision to turn away from Drew is not sudden, it is the result of mounting pressure, silent suffering, and a slow realization that she is no longer the woman she once was. Each passing day has revealed just how deeply Drew's presence has shaped her thoughts, controlled her movements, and distorted her perception of reality. And now, with her children's well-being at stake and her mental state unraveling, Willow understands that betrayal may be the only escape. But this betrayal doesn't come without consequence. Willow knows that any defiance will ignite Drew's obsession into a full-blown reckoning. She has seen the way he watches her, the way he corrects her thoughts with softly spoken but forceful redirections, how he speaks for her even when she wants to speak for herself. She knows how tightly Drew clings to the illusion of control, over her, over their future, and over the narrative he's crafted where Michael is the enemy, and Jason the traitor. To betray Drew is to shatter the illusion he has so desperately built, and Willow is painfully aware that once she begins to pull away, Drew may unravel completely. Yet her conscience demands that she act. The maternal instinct that once seemed muted beneath Drew's promises now roars within her like a call to arms. She sees Wiley's eyes when she sleeps. She hears Amelia's laughter in the quietest moments and feels the absence of both children like a wound. She recognizes that staying with Drew is not an act of love, it is complicity in her own destruction. And as Michael's ultimatum echoes in her mind, she begins to accept that letting go of Drew may be the only way to reclaim her identity and rebuild her future. What makes this betrayal even more devastating is the psychological toll it takes on Willow. She doesn't see herself as strong or heroic. In fact, she's consumed by guilt for allowing Drew to twist her sense of self, guilt for letting her children suffer in silence. Guilt for letting Michael's trust deteriorate while she tried to hold on to something broken. But guilt, unlike fear, doesn't paralyze her, it propels her forward. Each day she keeps Drew at arm's length, each time she says, "I need time," each lie she tells to delay his next move is a step closer to freedom. Drew, however, senses the shift. His obsession was never just about being loved, it was about being needed, about never losing again, about controlling the narrative at all costs. As Willow begins to distance herself emotionally and physically, Drew's behavior grows more volatile. He becomes more possessive, more paranoid, more intense in his declarations of devotion. He frames her doubts as betrayal, her silence as abandonment. In his mind, she owes him her loyalty, because he stood by her when no one else did, because he saved her from Michael. Because he loves her. But what Drew fails to see is that obsession is not love, and control is not safety. Willow no longer sees him as a savior, she sees him as a captor. She sees the man who isolated her from her children. The man who twisted her memories. The man who forced her to choose between freedom and emotional bondage. And that realization becomes the fuel for her most daring move yet. She begins reaching out to Jason, carefully and discreetly. She trusts that if anyone can understand the complexity of her situation, it's Jason, someone who has lived through fractured loyalty, moral ambiguity, and impossible choices. Her messages are vague at first, mentions of feeling unsafe, mentions of Drew's erratic behavior, but Jason, sharp and intuitive, reads between the lines. He begins positioning himself to intervene. Collecting evidence, watching Drew's movements, preparing for the moment Willow finally breaks free. This betrayal, once it erupts, will not be subtle. It will ignite Drew's worst fears, confirming every suspicion he ever had that the world was against him. And in that volatile mix of rage, desperation, and heartbreak, he may strike out in ways no one anticipates. Because for Drew, losing Willow is not just losing love, it's losing his last grip on purpose. And yet, Willow stands firm. Even as fear tightens its grip around her, even as Drew's voice becomes more insistent, more dangerous, she holds on to the image of Wiley running toward her, of Amelia's tiny hands reaching out. She holds on to the hope that this act of betrayal is not destruction, but rebirth. A painful, terrifying rebirth of the mother she once was, the woman she used to be before grief turned to fear, before dependency became a prison. In choosing her children, Willow finally chooses herself. And though it may cost her peace in the short term, though it may awaken the monster that Drew has kept hidden beneath his carefully curated facade, she no longer hesitates. The path ahead is filled with uncertainty, but for the first time in a long time, it is hers. And in that, there is power. There is healing. And there is the beginning of an end to Drew's obsession. Willow's decision to seek psychiatric treatment at Shady Brook marks a harrowing turning point in the unfolding tragedy that has overtaken her life. What began as emotional exhaustion in the courtroom has spiraled into a psychological breakdown that can no longer be hidden beneath carefully composed smiles or whispered reassurances. Her collapse wasn't just physical, it was the culmination of months of internalized conflict, suppressed trauma, and mounting fear. All of which have been compounded by Drew's obsessive grip on her emotional state. Shady Brook, once a place spoken of in hushed tones by others, has now become Willow's only refuge from the storm. Her admission to the facility is not simply a response to Michael's ultimatum or Jason's warnings, it's a silent scream for help. A quiet act of defiance against the mental prison that Drew has carefully constructed around her under the guise of love and protection. This move, subtle yet seismic, sends shockwaves through the lives of everyone connected to Willow, but none more devastating than those reverberating through Drew himself. For Drew, The woman who once clung to him for comfort and stability has now chosen distance, therapy, and an institution over his presence. The betrayal is total in his eyes, not because Willow has turned to Shadybrook, but because she has turned away from him. He sees it as a rejection not only of their relationship, but of everything he has done to control, guide, and shape her emotional reality. He believes she belongs with him, that he alone understands her trauma, and that her treatment is unnecessary if she would only allow him to fix her the way he sees fit. But Drew's view of healing was never about Willow's health, it was about her dependence. And now, faced with the ultimate break in that illusion, Drew begins to unravel. He paces rooms alone. He stares too long at the photographs of them smiling together. He replays conversations in his head, twisting each word into betrayal. He sees Shadybrook not as a medical facility, but as a battleground, a fortress that has stolen the last piece of his identity. Because Willow wasn't just a partner to Drew, she was a project, a purpose, a way to rewrite the pain of his own past. And now that purpose has slipped through his fingers. But what Drew doesn't yet realize is that Willow's admission into Shadybrook is not only her path to healing, it's the beginning of his downfall. Because once she is removed from his immediate influence, once the fog of emotional manipulation begins to lift, Willow begins to speak. She opens up in therapy. She reveals truths that she was too afraid or ashamed to confront before. She begins to recall the ways Drew isolated her, gaslit her, and used her children as emotional bargaining chips. The doctors listen. The records grow thicker. And what starts as an internal journey toward mental clarity becomes a documented case of psychological abuse that cannot be erased. Jason, hearing of Willow's treatment, knows what this means. He understands that Drew has crossed lines from desperation into danger. He begins to quietly move pieces into place, checking security footage, speaking to staff, working with Curtis and Portia behind the scenes to uncover every trace of Drew's recent actions. Meanwhile, Michael's lawyers are made aware of Willow's location and progress. And though Michael's heart is heavy knowing the mother of his children is in such fragile condition, he also feels a sense of vindication, a belief that maybe, just maybe, Willow is finally breaking free. And Drew? His spiral deepens. Cut off from Willow, he tries to regain control the only way he knows how, by lashing out. He blames Jason. He blames Michael. He even begins to question Scout, wondering aloud if his daughter has turned against him too. The man once seen as the steady hand in a crisis has become erratic, cold, and deeply paranoid. He begins plotting, not with precision, but with fury. He thinks of confronting Jason. He imagines storming Shadybrook. He even contemplates leaking information to the press to discredit Willow's mental state and portray her as an unfit mother, ironically reinforcing the very narrative that has placed her there in the first place. But Drew's unraveling doesn't go unnoticed. Carly sees it. Sasha sees it. And finally, even Scout sees it. The once admired hero of Port Charles now walks the line between desperation and delusion. And it is only a matter of time before that line breaks. The tragedy, of course, is that this was never a war Willow wanted. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't plan a betrayal. She simply wanted peace, a safe place to think, to breathe, to remember who she is without the voice of Drew telling her what she must be. And as she sits in quiet therapy sessions, slowly piecing herself back together, she begins to feel something she thought she had lost forever, clarity. And perhaps, in time, strength. But for Drew, this is the moment his world truly collapses. Not because Willow is gone, but because the version of Willow he tried to mold will never return. The real Willow, the one who's healing at Shadybrook. The one who remembers, the one who sees, she is not his anymore. And in the echo of that truth lies the most devastating reality of all. Drew was never the savior. He was the storm. And now the storm is ending. And he is utterly, irrevocably alone.